Newe Daryl, Ayacheke, Tepewe Nealakakoke. As Daryl said, I'm the manager of the museum and archive, but I basically just got passed the baton to present today. The project that we're going to be talking about today definitely was a team project that involved the staff at the Myaamia Center, the Cultural Resources Office, of which I'm part, and especially John Bickers, a recent Miami graduate and a coworker of mine. Before we get into the actual project itself, I want you all, we're going to do a little thought experiment to think about your name, and maybe if you're Myaamia, if you have a Myaamia name, to think about that as well, and kind of keep this in your mind. Fully admitting I'm not a sociologist, nor a philosopher, although I recognize that some of these fields might have something to say about why we have names and why they're important. I want to think about names just on a common sense level. Names are often a source of pride, something that we're proud of. They're very specific. Often they might denote what part of the country you come from, or even what community you belong to. We can realize that naming practices vary widely among cultures and between cultures, including obviously among and between Native American cultures. Even within the Myaamia community, there's several approaches to names and naming and how they're given and what they're used for. Sometimes names denote parentage or family associations. In my own personal heritage, I come from a Scandinavian culture that uses a system of patronymics, so my maiden name Jensen would denote what family I'm coming from. I would be the son of Jens, kind of. Obviously, it has also changed and evolved. Naming practices change as we go forward in time. And in many native cultures, names can denote clan affiliations or other associations with families. When a person receives a name can sometimes be important in cultures, whether it's at, sometimes before birth. Sometimes your name changes due to rites of passage, like coming of age or at marriage. Sometimes a name can change based on events, and often personal characteristics are taken into consideration in naming. Who gives a name might be a factor that's important when you're thinking about names. Specifically in many native cultures, it could be a designated community role. It could be grandparents, it could be parents, it could be a specific respected elder. Speaking specifically in the Myaamia community, we've observed that interest in naming and understanding naming practices correlates not only to language revitalization, but commonly an individual's specific engagement with those reclamation efforts. Some of the things that we've learned through this project, broadly speaking, are that names are included with important cultural narratives, such as the Myaamia origin story that Haley alluded to earlier. This is actually at the very conclusion of the story. It says, Inini wiangonje neje wendichinge se kakokwa se kakweta se kakananga se kakokwa. Because of this, the people are named se kakweta, se kakananga, and se kakokwa. So it's saying that the story is leading into this. That the names that people are given are tied to this retelling that's told so commonly. And that's just one example. Names occur commonly in other narratives as well. We've noticed that names are often tied to specific ancestors or places, and that's one of the areas we're definitely still studying and still trying to tease out what those interrelations are. Something that we have found is that naming is something that continued in the Myaamia community, both in Indiana and in Oklahoma, well past what would be considered a point of language loss, where other parts of language was no longer being used in the community. Naming is something that continued, sometimes just among specific families, but there was never a point at which it was completely gone. Even if people who were doing the naming didn't know what the names meant, or maybe before how they were given before, it's something that persisted. Another way that we see Myaamia names continuing is through Myaamia surnames. Of course, in Myaamia culture, traditionally somebody was given just one name, whereas we're all very familiar with having two names. When Western, say, Indian agents, for example, wanted to interact with a Myaamia elder, they were so very commonly wanted to give them two names. So a lot of times they would transition somebody's given name into their surname. Some of these you might recognize. Makata Sipana became Kota Sipin. Shapantosia turns to the surname Shap. Pakangia to Pakangi, and Mangunza to Mangosa. So some of these names we'll still see in our community today. And you might notice that this is an example of transcription, where it's simply taking the sounds that the Myaamia makes and turning them almost into this entirely different language. This is different than you might see in a lot of other Native American communities, where they'll take the actual literal meaning of that word and give it as a surname. Things you might see are beaver or wildcat or English translations. This is not translation. That is less commonly seen in Myaamia names. What we've learned about more recent times in Myaamia naming, and when I say recent, I'm kind of referring to the modern era of the 1940s to the present. And this is really an ongoing process as we talk to elders about their names, if they want to share information about who gave them their name and what process they were given, or what they're continuing to do in their families. So this is still an area that we're interested in having a conversation about. A lot of times, like I said, generations would adopt previous generations' name, just knowing that those were their family names, and so they carried them forward. Many times, particularly in Oklahoma, they were given by the chief upon request. Often these were descriptive names reflecting the influence of pan-Indian movements of the time. Sometimes they were given in English because before the period of language revitalization, and sometimes in later years they were given in Myaamia with assistance using what resources they had to come up with names. Sometimes people used literal translations of English words. An example of this that I can think of that would be prominent would be former Chief Forrest Olds. Chief Olds was very interested in Myaamia history and did a lot of traveling, researching payrolls and censuses, and eventually adopted the name Metekia, which is a documented Myaamia name, simply meaning forest. We've seen that the influence of youth programs such as the tribal classes here at MU and the Ewan Zapata summer camps have really drawn a need for, or an interest in the young people in having names that they can use among their peers. We've seen that grandparents are often interested in giving names to their grandchildren or children as a way to keep them connected to their tribal heritage. And we've also seen people that are interested in receiving names as a way to reconnect with their tribal heritage. Perhaps, like Haley was saying before, they had been removed from the community and they're now coming back and trying to learn, and just seeing this as a big part of their development of identity. And then again, we have instances where names are given by parents to their children, either at or directly after birth. So how did we come to the point of deciding to build a database of names? This project, I must say, was a result of so much of the language research and development that had been done for decades prior. I really don't think we could have undertaken this project even just a few short years ago, just because understanding how the names were recorded and constructed has really come a long way based on the work of Daryl and Dr. Costa. The earliest lists that we knew of personal names being recorded were in these highly rich linguistic documents, but like David said, they're not particularly accessible to linguists, and I'll show an example of or to non-linguists, and I'll show an example of this in a few slides. A few years ago, four years ago, we digitized a set of Miami payrolls here at Miami University, and part of this was going through and making a transcription of all the Miami names that appeared on those specific payrolls. And then we also undertook a project to digitize all of the payrolls and census documents, allotment records that are held at the MHMA. And as part of that, we created an index of where each individual between 1846, the point of removal, and 1937, the last Indian census roll taken by the BIA, we took that and made a compilation list of everybody who appeared in all of those records. While this didn't specifically focus on Miami names, it provided us a basis of where those names, we knew which records to start with that had really great Miami names embedded in them. So now we come to actually going forward with building the database. Our first goal was to find the records. Our records that we found range from the 18th century, basically at the point of contact, through the treaty era, through removal, through allotment, and into the mid-20th century. I'll go through some examples of our sources in a second, and then one of the more recent expansions that we've been working on is adding Peoria records. Because of the shared language with Peoria, we were interested to see if there were conclusions that we could draw by comparing the Miami to the Peoria. Really, there's no difference in the actual names, but we're hoping that maybe we can see how the family interrelates and maybe how they might be compared. We did our best to find actual original source documents, because when you're working from a transcription, you're relying on somebody else's, usually third-hand knowledge. So we know this is a French speaker writing English, but with Miami words. And so you know that it might not be exactly accurate. The highlighted name here is what looks like Chicago, right? And it is indeed Chicago, but we believe that's the Miami name, Chicago. This is an 1845 trader's claim, so this is directly before removal from Indiana. And you can see there's already influences of the French fur traders with some of the names given, but there's also quite a few still using their Myaamia names. Directly post-removal is the 1850 federal census. Those that remained in Miami, this particular census record is from Miami County, in Indiana, and only those that were removed are not included in a federal census because they are not living on federal land, but those that remained in Indiana are often found in the census. And these are really difficult records sometimes to work with because the census taker probably didn't have much interaction with the Miami people, so they're really just writing down exactly what they're hearing, which may or may not be at all what that person's name actually is. And here you can see these are mostly Myaamia names, but you see there at the top it says Mary Mongosa, so you see that Miami surname coming out, and then we have those that are just given single English names. To compare that to a record made in Kansas, this is Thomas Richardville's church records. So this excerpt here includes both Miami and white settler names. You can see at the very top a name, Rosanna Godakapwa, which was Godakapwa, her husband was Godakapwa, and so she was given the name Rosanna Godakapwa, and that's how she appears in the records. And then we can see another Miami name given, actually I think that's a Peoria name, Sarah Bigleg there at the bottom. But you can see very few given just their Miami names. This is probably late 1860s, early 1870s by this point. This is an 1880 Miami annuity payroll back in Indiana. And these are really just really rich resources because they very often give both an English name and a Miami name if they were both known. So we can really tie that individual to their name, which can be difficult where they're listed by their Miami name in one record and only their English name in another. These are really great to connect the two. This is an 1885 Indian census roll taken in Indian Territory. And as you can see, the adults and the elder generation have Miami names given, but their children are no longer being named. This is 1885. We can see the Richardville children, as far as I know, never received Miami names. This is really interesting, the Drake family, all the elder children, while they were in Kansas, were given Myaamia names, but the young children there, the 3-year-old and the 1-year-old sons, were never given Myaamia names that we know of. They've never been seen in a record. This is another really rich resource for tribal members in Indian Territory. This is an allotment register. This document actually has a few Myaamia names that are found here and nowhere else. And this is, may look semi-familiar. This is a Gatchett file card. And if you can't read Mr. Gatchett's fine handwriting, it says Changwashinga, noisemaker or thunder noise, is the Peoria wife of a Potawatomi man on the Miami reservation, Kishko. And with that information, we're able to tell that this is not a Peoria wife. This is a Miami woman named Chengwashinga, Rosanna Kishko, which we can pull from the allotment register before it. So it becomes this process of compiling all these records together, comparing them and seeing which person falls in which record. Sometimes that's 1 or 2 or 3, and sometimes that's 6 or 7 or 8. So sometimes you're working with many variations in their name, and it's just a process of figuring that out and employing your knowledge of language to say what makes the most sense in this case. Sometimes we're able to do that, and sometimes you'll see we're not able to do that yet. The last records that we used were Indian Claims Commissions. These were records from the 1950s, and we have the applications for people claiming for Indian Claims Commission's funds. They did ask specifically for Myaamia names, or for Indian names, as they called them on the form. And if they knew them, they generally would record them. And so these have become kind of a new source that we've been looking into. So building the database. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. All right. That's as good as I can do for now. This is just an excerpt. This is definitely not the entire thing. But you can see the forms or the fields that we used are it's not even, okay, the first field that's on A, that's not on the screen, is the current Myaamia phonetic spelling. The second field would be the original spelling. If there was a given translation within the record, the translation as we would translate it today. The sources, you can see that I didn't get all the sources pulled, but we have several different sources, and we have a key for that. That first one is a payroll, the first quarter payroll in Kansas, a Kansas allotment record, a treaty. So it's by year and then what type of record. If we know their English name, we put that in, particularly if it's a record where their English name and their Myaamia name are given right next to each other. We used a family or a tribal affiliation where appropriate, so that if a family member comes to us and says, I want to know all about the names in my family, we can just search and sort very easily with this spreadsheet. As of right now, we have 6,915 entries. We used an entry for every instance of a record found. So if a record has 70 names, we made 70 entries and wrote that specific record spelling as that entry. Of those, we have what I would call maybe confirmed entries of 5,217. So we have quite a few more that were really are unknown, so we don't know what that name is. We haven't been able to figure out how it's supposed to be spelled or anything like that. Okay. This project definitely has kind of like a two-sided thought. There's definitely an academic kind of research understanding side, and we've definitely learned a lot about how maybe families were related in the early pre-removal times. And how names kind of appear in records. We've definitely learned a lot about that. And we're still learning about traditional practices and naming practices. But our ultimate goal in undertaking this project was to recover these specific names and practices, and just in order to support wider community use. It's definitely a demand that people have been asking about over the past few years, and one that we saw as an increased need in our community. So this database will be used as an internal tool in assisting tribal members who would like to see Myaamia names continued in their own families. And upon being contacted, we can use this database along with other family records to look for family-specific names. Look in that individual's line, see what names were most commonly used. Maybe that would provide us clues as to what might be a culturally appropriate name. And then just provide that information to the family so that we can return to a more traditional approach of a decentralized practice where families and elders are the ones sought the honor of giving names. And I think we're just about out of time, but I'll leave this up here for a second. Definitely, if you're more interested in hearing about names or have any questions, feel free to talk with me at the back table at the conclusion of the conference, email me, or talk with Daryl, of course, as well. Thank you.